Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Brandon Tignanu, Senior Director of Business Development at View, Inc.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making it here today. First and foremost, I want to take a moment to congratulate USGBC on 20 years. What a fantastic milestone. We've moved out of our awkward teen years and are now a beautiful, budding young adult. All right. And second, another equally important milestone being announced this week and really being rolled out here, I'm delighted to be here, is LEED V4. As Rick said before, it was a struggle, it was a fight, but I think it was well worth it. I think it represents a meaningful and thoughtful advance to the LEED building rating system. I think it's a fantastic advancement for the organization, so thank you for that as well. LEED V4 has many changes, and I think we'll be hearing more about those today. But the two that I'm most excited about are the integrative design credit category and also the revised materials and resources category. And the reason that I'm so excited about those is that, like many of you, I think what it does is it moves the discussion away from conservation of just materials and resources, whether those are kilowatts or gallons of water, and it moves it more towards a human-centric design. When I talk to architects, I often talk about buildings and their efficiency, but I think we lose the message when we talk about efficiency often, because really buildings are machines that are designed to be efficient for the productivity, the comfort, the wellness, the recovery of the occupants. And so I think that's what efficiency should be measured as when we're talking about buildings. And I think that V4 starts to move us in that direction in a very, very programmatic way. That's an important change. The first of those is with regard to health and wellness. And I want to announce today that View and myself, we completely support that change, and we completely embrace the concept of materials disclosure and materials transparency. So I'm proud to announce today that View has just completed third-party certification of both an HPD and a disclose certification. So we're very, very proud of that step forward with materials transparency. And with regard to productivity, I hope that technology continues to work within the rating system and within the design community to advance the way that people interact with their environment, work with design elements that drive comfort, whether it's lighting comfort or thermal comfort, whether it's glare, whether it's acoustic issues, all of these that come together and drive productivity. And also, I'd be remiss without saying, allow for a connectivity with the outdoor environment. So for all of these great milestones that we're able to celebrate today, 20 years, LEED V4, and materials disclosure, I want to welcome you to today's session. Thank you all very, very much.
Good afternoon. Have you guys had too much for lunch? My tribe. I've been waiting all Greenbuild to say that. Look at you guys. I am Beth Heider. I'm the immediate past chair of USGBC's Board of Directors, and I am really, really pleased to invite you to this Greenbuild Master Speaker session. Each year, as you know, USGBC invites inspiring leaders from across our profession to speak to you on topics that are of import to our work. This year, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce one of USGBC's own inspirational leaders and green building visionary, the Senior Vice President for LEED, our own Scot Horst. Now, I can remember in 2012 when I was chair of the board, Scott first talking about LEED version 4. In fact, some of you might remember that back in those days it was LEED 2012. And we struggled because we knew that this was going to be big. It was going to be really important. But how could we move the market without losing the market? And how could we, reminded of the great Henry Ford quote, if people had asked what they wanted, he would have created faster horses. So what LEED version 4 is not a faster horse. It's a faster Horst, I think. It's a way to do not less bad, but actually do more good. And it's something that I think will drive our business once again to higher levels of performance. I am personally excited to announce to you today on behalf of Skanska's Commercial Development Group that we found on Friday, thank you GBCI, that our own Capitol Tower project was LEED version 4 Platinum pre-certified. Is that great? And Mott's our president of CD. Here's to you, man, because this also took a little bit of corporate bravery. So we encourage you all to be brave, be bold, and be LEED 4. So LEED version 4 in performance is that revolutionary next step in green building. And so I'm really excited to hear more today from Scott to see how LEED version 4 has matured and is going to continue to raise the bar and move us towards a future that's focused on the performance of our buildings. So without further ado, please join me in a really strong, warm welcome for Scot Horst. Scott, where are you coming from?
Thank you very much, Beth. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here at Greenbuild, this year especially launching V4 and continuing to move towards what we know really matters in buildings, performance. But let me start with people. People. I have to say first, there are three really important people here for me today. There's my mother, my wife, and my daughter. People matter. We have relationships with each other. And we do a lot of things with these relationships and through these relationships that get us to amazing places. We're capable of winning wars, doing incredible things, building bridges, building infrastructure, building cities, moving beyond together in a way when we know that this relationship with each other works. We also know that this relationship doesn't always work. It can work against us. It can work for us, or it can work against us. This is a great example. My favorite example is perhaps the civil rights movement, where you had people both working for each other, and you had people working against each other. Now, this sounds kind of like a feel-good kind of thing, but it's not. There was incredible discipline and outrageous fortitude in what it took to fight or to be able to be fought upon without fighting back. I love the stories of how the civil rights movement worked so hard towards learning how to not fight. Because you have that fight or flight thing that happens in your body when someone comes to hit you in the face or hit you with a bat. And you have to learn how to not run. You have to learn how to take it, in a sense. And the incredible ability for people to work together ended up winning over this outrageous, vast amount of hatred. So people working together, doing things together, really has the ability to move things in a way that is almost unfathomable to us. Now, there's a big difference between us and our previous ancestors, especially Neanderthals. And the big difference has to do with how we deal with this. Neanderthals, when they would get to the shoreline and see the horizon, would stop. Humans did something completely different. But first you have to ask yourself, why would they go out into the horizon? Why would they go out into the water without knowing what was there? And how many of them had to die in order to find an island like Easter Island? Or how many of them died before they found Madagascar? There's something about us that pushes us to go beyond, to push out into the horizon, to try to become more than we are. That's in our nature. That's who we are. The question is, do we do it together? Do we do it in a way that makes us work together with intention? Or do we just let it happen? Modern humans built boats. Modern humans built things that allowed them to go into the horizon. The boat is technology. So we have a relationship with technology. And technology, just like our relationship with each other, can work for us or against us. The bicycle is a fantastic example. The bicycle is capable of moving humans at sustained speeds longer than any other land animal on the planet. Stephen Jobs called the computer the bicycle of the mind. So imagine I mean, you gotta love the guy. But imagine just that sense that technology is creating the best in us. It has the ability to, in the case of a bicycle, it has the ability to move you and move your muscles in an incredibly efficient way that allows you to be effective. And in the case of a computer, it's about bringing out the best in you, potentially. We also know that technology and our relationship with technology has the ability to destroy us. We actually use it to destroy each other. It's incredibly powerful, this relationship that we have with technology. But the one that I want to talk about, the one that I think is most relevant to our discussion today, V4 and building performance, has to do with the relationship that doesn't really get tended or isn't intentionally taken care of. Automobiles are a fantastic example. So automobiles are capable of moving us faster than bicycles. We don't even need our muscles. And the growth of the automobile, as we all know, has completely changed the world. It's completely changed the way we deal with each other, the way we move around the planet, the way we interact with each other. But it also has this huge impact on the way we live with each other and the lives we lead with each other and what we aren't capable of doing with each other because we spend all the time in the automobile in congestion. Now, nobody intended for that to happen. Nobody said, let's create a whole bunch of awful congestion and try to make it whatever it is. Let's just make people's lives miserable. Nobody suggested that. And yet it exists all over the planet. So this unintentional ability to allow things to happen, to allow our relationships with each other and our relationship with technology to just go, to just happen, in almost all cases, instead of working for us, the relationships work against us. People and buildings. Buildings are technology. Buildings are our relationship with each other and technology. It's our relationship with each other that's happening in this room, and this happens to be the cloud. Of course, it seems that when you save something to the cloud because it sounds so amazing that it's going off into the cloud, into a cloud, but it's actually going to a building. And that building has to be cooled, and it uses energy, and all kinds of things happen. I'm sure nobody is intentionally saying, let's create this technology that allows us to just save tons and tons and tons and tons of information without really thinking about what are the side effects of that. Buildings are technology. And buildings matter. Buildings matter because they last so long. So the thing about buildings is, unlike almost every other thing in your life, the things in your life, they tend to go away. I don't have my original car that I first started driving back in 1975. I don't have many of the original things that I had as a child. I have very few of the stuff that I used to have. I lived in Brooklyn for almost 12 years, and there's almost no sign of what happened to my life there. There's nothing left in Brooklyn except one thing: the pipes that were replaced in the building that we lived in. And I was responsible for those pipes. So there's one thing that lasts out of my legacy of living in Brooklyn: pipes. Buildings matter. And not only do buildings matter, but it's important to understand that our ancestors, the people that built buildings like this, they had a connection with nature that we have lost. And we haven't lost it intentionally. We didn't decide, let's get away from nature. We didn't all take a vote or start a movement. We basically said, we had an unintentional relationship with technology that moved us away from nature. But there is this thing that we need to get back to. And now, I'm not talking about getting just back to nature. I'm talking about finding a way back. Finding a way back to this thing that is us. Because it's not a relationship with nature, we are nature. How do we get back to this place that we know and yet have not intentionally found? Buildings, people, LEED. LEED is our tool. It's not the only tool, but LEED is the tool that we use in order to make our relationship with buildings intentional. We use LEED as this way to basically say, this can be a good relationship, and good things can happen, positive things can happen. We don't even, like we've all been talking now for years, we don't have to have this discussion about whether or not a building is going to reduce the negative impacts that it has. We actually have the ability, and we have many examples of it, of buildings that have a positive impact on the world. LEED, the power of LEED, and the power of the ability to use it as a tool has to do with a number of things. So before I get to what I think those things are, let me talk about a little context about how LEED was created and what was going on. And I'm going to start in the 1930s. Could almost start anywhere. But what happened in the 30s was cooling technology became cost effective. What that meant was that for the first time, not only because of heating, but because both heating and cooling in almost any place in the planet, we could avoid the wind, we could avoid the weather, we could avoid the sun, we could avoid the rain, and almost everything that everyone had been connected to in some way in the past could be shut out and kept out. We could close up the building and change the thermostat one way or the other in order to make it work for us. This was not the only step, but it was one of the most important steps that occurred that started to separate us from our relationship with nature. Unintentionally, a lot of great things were happening, but unintentionally we started to move away. And it had big impacts. This combined with half-learned lessons about energy efficiency from the 1960s essentially meant that we closed buildings up even tighter. So in the 1960s, what happened was, in order to become more efficient, we basically just sealed as much as we possibly could. And what happened? Sick building syndrome. Sick building syndrome was actually almost coined and defined in Philadelphia in 1976 with the determination of Legionnaire's disease that occurred right down the street. So now we're here in the 1990s. And the 1990s were a really interesting time. In the 1990s, technology was growing like crazy in the form of computers and software. Almost everybody by the mid-90s had computers in their offices and were using it for everything. I personally had put it off until 1995 thinking that email was a fad and that no one was ever going to get me to use it and that somehow it would go away. I was completely wrong, and I live by it now. I can't almost ever get away from it. But what technology allowed to happen was something that happened unintentionally. Buildings in the 1990s were essentially being built like they were in the 1970s, with the exception of several standards that were meant to deal with things like sick building syndrome. So what we have is buildings that weren't being built very well, and technology allowed us to build really bad buildings incredibly efficiently. So we could repeat really bad mistakes over and over, and what you see when you drive around the suburban countryside, around America, outside cities, is you see almost the identical set of buildings that is almost identically recreated in perfect formation over and over and over again. Thanks to technology. Technology and software started to replace architecture in the 90s. And what you see over and over, it's one of my favorite stories, is actually a well-known software engineer who's worked for a very large software company for a long time, says that he can drive around any place in the country from the 90s and tell you exactly which software was used for which building. That's not surprising, I think, to many of you. But it's important to understand how a new building gets put together. Because in the 90s, what was happening was lots of new buildings. There were new building boom just starting, just really getting kicked off. New buildings are put together with a specification book. And the specification book comes from the office. And the specification book lives in offices in architecture and engineering firms all over the world. And the specification book gets pulled down, and the new building gets designed, and then there are things that are changed in the specification book. The least amount that you change, the more money you make. So the incentive, oh, they told me to turn this off. Sorry. So the incentive is to do less and to continue to use the same template in order to continue to build similar types of buildings. So essentially, the specification book continues, as it turns into a technology with software, the cut and paste specification book grows like crazy, and it grows all around the world. Another thing happening in the 90s was a lot of really sincere people concerned about environmental concerns. And they were doing a lot of things in buildings. So you had people doing solar on buildings, and they were saying, this is an environmental building. The word green building didn't exist yet. And then some people were doing really incredible site work, and they were saying, this is a green building. And there were some people doing, putting recycled content in their carpet or other materials, and they were saying, that's a green building. And the one thing that these people could all agree on is that whatever the other person was doing wasn't good enough. It's very typical. So they were working against each other. They had no way of really kind of coming together to say, let's figure out something good. Well, that is precisely what happened. LEED comes along, and I see Rob Watson there. LEED comes along and puts a set of strategies together. All the things that these people were doing were strategies. They were things that you do for an outcome. They put together a set of strategies, and they come up with this checklist. This is the very first 1.0 LEED rating system. This book probably had more to do with changing the market than almost anything else. This is the operational plan, or what you might call the reference guide. These books changed everything. Not because they were such amazing systems of wisdom, not because they were so incredible, but because they pulled people together. So now, all of a sudden, everybody that was working against each other started working with each other. And they could start to become intentional about their relationship with each other and with buildings that started to change the market. And how did it change the market? All of a sudden, manufacturers started seeing, wait, I have this ailing technology called low VOC paints. No one's buying it. Now, all of a sudden, I just got a job because of it. And it's this something called LEED. What is this? Go find out. And then all of a sudden, they start winning jobs. Then all of a sudden, everybody else starts getting into the VOC paint game because they're losing projects. By a few years later, we used to kind of laugh about it, about how much we saw each other congratulating each other. A few years later, there was this amazing feeling of great happiness. We have 300 projects. Long way we've come, which is really quite incredible. So, the big thing that we've done is we've replaced, since the 1990s, the cut and paste specification book. That book that is used around the world to build new buildings is now a completely different book, thanks to what we've done together. And it's not certified, a lot of it, but typical practice is completely different. Typical practice today tends to mean that project teams are talking about how to optimize systems. What we did with LEED was we brought the building industry into the late 20th century. We brought it out of the 70s into about 2005. It's still doing nothing compared to what it can do, but we moved it decades. And we took advantage of huge, low-hanging fruit. How did that work? Going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Engineers and architects didn't talk. And we all know stories of this. We all have great stories of how we've started to change this discussion and how LEED started to change the discussion, because engineers would walk in the room and use a rule of thumb to size the system, especially a cooling system. They'd walk in the room and say, so many BTUs, or tons of cooling per cubic yard. I'll say that for my cubic meter, I'm sorry, I'll say for my international friends in the audience, since we're talking about LEED v4. And then what happened was they would just size that system without knowing anything else about what was going on. LEED brings to the market energy modeling, a 20th and 21st century tool. It brings to the market the ability to say scientifically, what if we look at these systems together and move them around? What might happen if we do that? It allows you to play what if in a very smart way. And then we bring commissioning to the market, and we say a building should function the way it was designed to function. It means we should be able to say without equivocation that this thing is working the way it's supposed to work. And we get huge uptake because of it. Another thing happening in the 90s was a discussion about globalism. I don't know if you recall or if any of you were involved, but at the time there were even protests in the streets on a regular basis, and students and activists being very concerned about what is globalism and what is it going to mean and how do we stop it. They saw it as the spread of the corporate power and the corporate world taking over. No matter what you think of that discussion, it's done. Globalism exists. Since the 1990s, we have turned into a global economy. And LEED has actually been part of, it has grown upon the wings of that growth. I believe that what LEED does in the global economy is provide a strong sense of intention that without LEED wouldn't be there. We've done a number of things about LEED that has changed how it's used in the world. One of my favorites is, if you look at many of the other systems like BREEAM, the UK system, or DG&B, the German system, they were created, and when they decided to go outside of their area or their region, they said, let's do a different region, let's pick a region, or let's work with another group. We'll go to Norway, so there's BRE, Building Research Establishment out of the UK, BRE-NL, and there's BRE Sweden. Now, and on and on. There are a number of them. Now, the bad thing about that is you can't compare. You can't say what's happening in a BREEAM building in the UK and how it's exactly the same to a BREEAM building that's in Sweden. What we did was we said, let's all work together on the same system. Let's have one LEED that everyone gets to use around the world that allows us to intentionally and powerfully work together and get more people behind the system in order to move markets, because then we know that if we have the right people asking the right questions about different products and systems and the way they work around the world, that it will make a big difference. It just so happens that we love to check each other out. We love to compare ourselves to each other. We love this word compare, C-O-M, means with or together. Compare and compete are things that you do with each other in order to define who you are. Comparing and understanding how you fit relative to someone else is the hallmark of what we do. And now, buildings getting built in New York are comparing themselves to buildings getting built in Shanghai, to buildings in Stockholm, to buildings in Sao Paulo. And here we are in 2013, headed quickly to 2014. It's a very different world than the 1990s. Doesn't mean it's necessarily a happy world. But technology and our relationship with technology has grown and advanced, and especially as it relates to buildings. So we're here to talk about LEED v4 and performance, but what do we mean by performance? What is performance? I suspect if I ask you, let me ask you, how many of you think performance means energy use? How many of you would raise your hands? This is probably a very small group because you probably think it's kind of a fraction of an answer, right? But it's not just energy use, and it's not just water, and it's not just waste. It's a variety of different things that add up to what performance means in a building. But this is a very difficult discussion for us to have. We haven't made very much headway on this. The reason for that is because LEED was put together as a list of strategies. Our favorite example, the one we love to hate, is the bike rack. Everyone loves to hate this credit. It just so happens that we know that if you do a strategy, if you do something like put a bike rack someplace and make it easy for someone to ride their bike, the chances are they will ride their bike. But it doesn't mean that they do. So the strategy doesn't necessarily lead to something else. We need to think of strategies as the same side of a coin relative to outcomes. Outcomes are where we measure performance. Strategies are things you do to reach an intended outcome. An intended outcome, intention, working together towards an intention. Now, the problem is we're keeping score in all these different ways. What we do really well at U.S. Green Building Council with LEED is we keep score. Keeping score is very important. But of course, we're keeping score with both strategies and outcomes. So it's a little confusing, and I'll keep coming back to this. Think of strategies and outcomes very similarly to a diet book. You have a diet book, and it tells you when you can eat and what you can eat and when you should exercise and what you should do when you exercise. And you have this very specific list of strategies, things that you should do. But the only thing that tells you, if you're dieting to lose weight, whether or not you're losing weight, is the scale. And the scale is this very simple mechanism which we all step on the same. And fortunately, because we all step on the same scale, we have a pretty good idea what it means if I say so many kilograms. Actually, I know, we've got pounds, you've got kilograms. That's confusing, isn't it? Keeping score is really important to us. Keeping score is one of the ways that we compare with each other. We're brought up to keep score so we can compare. As humans, we're defining ourselves by looking at each other and seeing where do I fit relative to this other person. I was always the one that was down in the 50% range when these papers came out. So I always had a pretty good idea how I was doing in the class. SAT scores are another way that we keep score in our lives. A credit score is something that makes all the difference relative to how you get to decide where you live and how much money you can borrow. LEED v4 is about helping us keep score in a new way. So let's look at what we're trying to achieve in LEED v4. I was alluding to this before, but let's be a little bit more intentional about how we talk about it. A building is an organism. A building has all these different systems in it that work with each other or against each other. So the fluids that move through the building are similar to a circulatory system. The waste that goes through the building are there's solid waste and there's liquid waste that goes through the building. This is similar to the digestive system. There's a nervous system in a building. That's all the electrical components and all of the other things that are happening around for technology in order to share signals. There's a muscular system, which is the envelope of the building. There's a skeletal system, which is the structure of a building. And there's a ventilation system, which is the air coming through the building, or it's the respiratory system. Now imagine if you had contracts and different contractors who bid for trying to create each of these systems. Imagine if you tore all of these things apart, all these different systems apart as an organism and said, let's try to make this work. I know that the guy on the end with the respiratory system is going to try to figure out, I probably need a bigger set of lungs. I need a bigger set of lungs. If I have a bigger set of lungs, it's going to be more work. I'm going to make a little bit more money. But he doesn't necessarily have to spend if he doesn't have to necessarily spend any time optimizing that or making it work with the person in the circulatory system, it's not going to work very well. The systems are going to work against each other. We learned this lesson from one of our gurus, Amory Lovins, who told us that very early on, systems designed to optimize each other in isolation tend to pessimize the entire system. Pessimize is a very funny word. It doesn't exist in the dictionary, my wife reminds me. But the point is, they work against us, or they work against each other. So systems that aren't designed to work together work against each other. Turns out that buildings are so much like people. V4 is bringing this idea of the building as an organism to a new level in a sophisticated way. It's designed to help designers, for new construction especially, spend as much time as possible thinking about how the systems work with each other. That means they have to know things in order to have a conversation as they go through the system using LEED. The things they need to know are found in the integrative design credit. The integrative design credit asks for some very specific things. It suggests you find out how much water falls on this site, how much wind blows on this site, how much sun shines on this site. What's going on in this place? What's the history of this place that might be restored if you know enough about it? And you take that information and you bring it through the design process, and it changes how you put all those pieces together. Our goal is to create the building as a whole once again. This thing that we've torn apart in liability and contracts, we want to bring it back together as a whole. So, in LEED, I want to be very clear about something actually. In LEED, we certify in two different basic places. Of course, we have other certifications. We have neighborhoods that we certify. It's very important. But we certify to design and construction, and we say it's done, and we give the mark. We put the mark LEED on it. And then we certify to existing buildings. Now, one thing we know for sure is that if a building exists, it's an existing building. We also know that, if just even looking at this idea of the organism, that a newborn, an organism doesn't just stop. It doesn't just become into being, and then it's over. An organism, if a building is an organism grows, it changes, it morphs, all kinds of things happen. It's alive. A building is alive the same as an organism, and we need to be able to track what that means. But we have a problem. The problem is it's really challenging to have to track all that information about strategies and outcomes and give it to us at USGBC and GBCI. Not only is it really challenging, we appreciate that everyone's doing it because we're all working together to change the world in this really powerful way. But we know that once you've done it for new construction, you are not coming back to do it for existing buildings. We've offered that so many times. We've said you can get free registration. We've tried to put it at your doorstep. We've tried to drop it in your mail. We've said, please do LEED for existing buildings if you have a new construction project. It's not happening. And we know that because buildings are alive, a certification should never be done. A certification is something that should reflect the life and what's really happening in the building. So let's come back to that in a little bit. Let me talk about other ways that we're dealing with performance in LEED v4. LEED v4 is essentially a health system. Health is what LEED has always been about, but it's never been only about the health of the people outside, the health of the world, the health of the earth. It's also about the health of the people inside. It came from that context of sick building syndrome. It was in that context that LEED for the first time asked engineers and designers to optimize the amount of energy that was being used with the amount of fresh air that was being brought in. Make people healthy and save energy. It was a radical concept. But it's worked. You've done it. You've done these amazing things. Now where do we go next? We continue to look at health. But we don't just say that it's only healthy for the people in the buildings. It's not just, that's not how you could just define health. That means that everything else that has to do with the building is unintentional. It means that we just let it go, which means it will work against us. In the location and transportation category, we've added a new category. This category is very important. In LEED for new construction, essentially what it means is that we have a greater focus on how people get to and from their building. That continues to grow as a focus. The reason is that all those buildings that I was talking about on the edge of town in the United States in the 90s, people are still driving to them. With those buildings, oftentimes the way that people get to and from the building is up to 70% of the entire operational impact of the building from a carbon perspective. That's huge. Of course, that varies widely. It could be 5%, it could be 95%. But we know that it has a big impact. In LEED for existing buildings, we have a performance pathway. The great thing about LEED v4 and LEED for existing buildings is the credits have been split up into two categories. One is prepare, it's called establishment credits. Get ready, establish yourself for performance. Get set up, get a meter, figure out how you're going to ask people how they get to work, and then performance credits. So in LEED for existing buildings, there's a performance pathway that allows for transportation. Now, remember the integrated design process credit. One of the challenging things about the site category is that it's very difficult to measure what's happening. So we have an overabundance of strategies. Not an overabundance, but we have strategies. We always have used strategies when we don't have a way to measure outcomes. But here's what we know. We know that if the project team is thinking about how much rain is falling on the site, and they're combining this category with the water category, they're thinking, how do I keep the water that's falling on the site? And how do I use that water as much as possible in the building so I can bring less water into the building, and then I have to get rid of less water? So how do I keep not thinking of water as something that I have to manage? How do I think of it as something that's a gift that I can use in the building? LEED v4 helps you with this. In the energy section, there's a significant bump in the stringency that's required. There are two things I want to say about this. I'm not sure if the committee, the ASHRAE committee of ASHRAE 90.1, I'm not sure if they got excited with the success of LEED and they moved ASHRAE 90.1 2010 up high, so high, or if they just know that the technology that exists today means that it's entirely possible to create much more efficient buildings than we did in the past. I believe it's the latter. They know that it's possible, and they know that you can do it. So, in new construction, we have a brand new, not a brand new, we have ASHRAE 90.1, and we're referencing 90.1, and it's very stringent. And then we moved up the bar for Energy Star in the LEED for Existing category, LEED for Existing Buildings category. I think we don't know yet if that was a mistake. We have 120 beta projects. What we're going to be doing is watching very closely, because what we don't know is by moving up the threshold to Energy Star 75, if that just completely limits the building stock that's able to come into LEED for Existing buildings. We're going to watch it. The good thing about having done the beta and the good thing about the way we're rolling out V4 is that we can change it if we have to. We can bring it back to you as the membership to revote on it if we have to, if we think it makes sense. I guarantee we're watching it like a hawk. Big things happening in the materials category. The material category is updated completely. The materials category now is all about a new way of thinking about products. What we want designers to do is to be able to purchase products the same way that they go purchase food. When you purchase food, you have two things that you look at. One is a nutrition label, tells you how many calories, how much fat, so on and so on. And the other is an ingredient label. And usually if you look and you see, this one has more fat than that one, you take the one that has less fat, especially if you're thinking about the diet book. And then you have all these ingredients, and you usually, if you look and you see that that list is long, you don't want that product. That's typically how you think. We want people to be able to shop for building products the same way. The reality is you have no idea what the impacts are of the products are that you're bringing into your building today. You don't know what's in them. So there are two things that are happening here. One thing is we've created a partnership with UL that I'm very excited to announce, which is about environmental product declarations. What we're saying with these partnerships, with this partnership and what's happening with the transparency credit or the material ingredient reporting credit is we're trying to have the world start to ask for things that they haven't been asking for, and we're starting to try to expand what kind of information is available. Now, you might say that has nothing to do with performance. We aren't saying that there have to be performance levels. But we are saying for the first time that performance is in the materials category. You will be buying materials based on how much carbon is in it, in a functional unit of material. You'll be buying it based on how much water was used to create that material, how much waste, how much transportation was used to get it around. These are all things that are in an environmental product declaration. And then you'll be using things like health product declarations to say what's in the material, because manufacturers will be telling you what the ingredients are that are in the materials. And in the indoor environmental quality section, again, a huge focus on health, a huge focus on fresh air, on understanding what the materials are doing to that air that are in the space, on what your impact is in that space, and quality of light. You'll see a lot about that. So, people, LEED, buildings. So I'm talking about performance, and I'm talking about LEED, and I'm talking about strategies and outcomes. But I'm still not able to give you this really simple, very clear way of saying, let's all step on the same scale. let's all figure out if we can move forward together by knowing that the unit of measure that we're using is the same one. What would it look like? What would it look like if we did that? What would it look like if we separated out the strategies? If we didn't say, I'm going to tell you what you need to do in order to get to a certain place. I'm just going to measure whether you got to this place, and then you figure out how to get there. Or you use the credits that we have, and you get there yourself. What would it look like if the football player is running down the field, and as he gets to a certain place, he has very strict instructions tactically to say, at the 50-yard line, I stop, I turn 2 degrees, I throw the ball 30 feet at this trajectory, and there better be somebody there. The football player has the ability to change his tactics as the field unfolds around him. That's the whole point of the game. The whole point of the game is that someone is in offense and someone is on defense, and they're trying to trick each other. And it's up to the person that has the most freedom to rise the most. What if we step on the same scale? What if buildings have a scale, a system that allows us to compare ourselves to each other? What would it look like? All the different ways we keep score. What would happen if we unleashed the incredible creative potential in the human spirit at the same time that we used the power of all of us working together to go in the same direction? What if we did those two things at the same time? We all have examples of it. What if our example of our relationship with technology allows us to compare ourselves with each other in ways that we're moving, in things that are happening in our lives? People, LEED, and buildings. I'm very excited to announce something today. We've been working really hard. LEED v4 is launched this week. LEED v4 moves the market in a whole new direction. This is the LEED Dynamic Plaque. The LEED Dynamic Plaque measures outcomes of buildings, measures building performance in 5 basic categories. Human experience, things that we pulled from the indoor environmental quality section. Transportation, things that we pulled from the location and site section. Waste, things that we pulled from the materials section. Water, things from the water section. And energy. The LEED Dynamic Plaque allows us to compare ourselves with each other. In each section, you can go in and see what your score is, what your score was last month, and what your score was the same period in the previous year. And you're given a global benchmark, and you're given a local benchmark. The LEED Dynamic Plaque uses a database of LEED buildings in order to compare ourselves with each other around the globe. This is the first time anyone has created an energy score, a global energy score, allowed to be used in any of the 140 that LEED buildings exist. What you see in each of these sections is how we can make the invisible actionable. And we aren't telling you how you have to get there. We can keep coming up with other ways of helping you find out how to get there, but we've got tons of credits about that. We've got volumes of reference guides. So what if we use this system as a recertification system for buildings that doesn't require you, once you are an existing building, and if you are an existing building, you are an existing building, you do exist. What if, as an existing building, you can use this performance system instead of all of the credits. And we can be confident about the outcomes of what we're all accomplishing together. Now, I know you might think that I just have a whole bunch of really cool PowerPoint slides, but we've actually built this, and it actually exists, and that's what's so exciting. You can find it if you want to go to get one yourself to leadon.io, and this is what the actual plaque looks like. The first one is installed at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. We have found out that we went from platinum down to gold, but we're 1 point away from getting back to platinum. And we're very excited because we know what we need to do in order to get there. So the whole facilities team is very excited because they have tools that help them know what can happen. Okay. There's something that distinguishes us from our ancestors. It's how we deal with the horizon. It's what we do when we get to the shoreline. What's different between us and our ancestors, or our previous, the Neanderthal brothers and sisters, was that we go into it. We create technology and we use our relationship with technology to go into the horizon. The Apollo space mission was a boat. It was like a boat. It was this vessel that took us into a new horizon, into some place that we had never been before. And it was all about our relationship with each other as a country at the time, and our relationship with the Earth, and our relationship with beyond the Earth, and our relationship with technology. We need to get back to something that we know. We need to get back to something that's real to us. But we can't get back the way we came. Buzz Aldrin, when he was standing on the moon, talked about this incredible desolation of being on the moon and how incredibly alone it felt. And then he talked about the moon journey was not a round trip. He said the journey back was a completely new journey than the journey there. The journey to the moon meant taking off. It meant blasting off from Earth. It meant going around the Earth. It meant going to the moon. It meant separating the Gemini spacecraft from the Apollo. It meant landing on the moon. But the journey back was completely new. It meant taking off from the moon. Nobody had ever done that before. It meant orbiting the moon and then reconnecting in the lunar escape with the Apollo spacecraft. Nobody had ever done that before. And then it meant doing other things that had never happened before getting back to Earth. You cannot go back the way you came. We can't go back the way we came. Our only hope is an intentional relationship with each other and with technology. We're going back to something that we know. It's a place that holds ancient knowledge. It's a place of truth. It's a place of love. It's this wonderful, fragile earth we call our island home. We live here. We have the great fortune of working with each other and sharing our time here together. How will we leave it? Thank you very much.